Welcome back to Creating a Universe, where we're discussing the various elements that go into creating a believable and immersive world for your story. Today we're going to be talking about creating a diverse array of races and how they might fit into the different locations of your world. One of the most important aspects of world building is creating a diverse range of races for your characters. These races can be based off of real-world races, or they can be entirely fictional, but either way they should be well-rounded, have their own cultures, practices, and beliefs. Something to consider when creating a race is how and where it fits into different locations in your world. Which races live in the snowy mountains? Which live in the sandy deserts, on islands, etc. Unless the story takes place during a high age of civilization, your races should mainly reside within their own lands. There are always going to be travelers, immigrants, and merchants, but unless there's a good reason for it, people generally stay within their own cultures, especially if your story takes place in the past or in a lower medieval societal setting. A good example of how this is done poorly is in Amazon's The Rings of Power, where Numenor, an island civilization, is virtually 50-50 with every race and ethnicity you can imagine. Even worse are the Harfoots, or the so-called precursors to the Hobbits. No wandering nomadic tribe would ever be as multiracial as the Harfoots, especially with how recently they came into existence. It is absolutely immersion shattering because as humans, we subconsciously understand that is not how nature works. A good real-life example of this would be the Native Americans. Many Native American tribes were nomadic. Races are important, and so they should not just be a checkbox that you're trying to meet a certain quota for. On the opposite end of this point would be something like The Walking Dead, for example. In the show, Rick's group is virtually, in all aspects, a nomadic tribe. Yet they are always meeting and adding all sorts of people with different cultural backgrounds and races to their group, because the modern world is already much more diverse. A few good ways around this issue, or exceptions if you will, would be if there was a large-scale war. For example, the Crusades, where a huge number of Europeans were in the Middle East. Or, as I said before, if the story takes place during a high societal age where people are already very mingled. Otherwise, diversity for the sake of diversity can take many people out of their immersion even if they can't put their finger on why. And that's because up until the modern day, high volumes of racial mingling was very seldom seen. Now before you say, what if it's fantasy? You are correct. When it comes to fantasy, you have every right to do whatever you want. But once again, if that's the route you decide to take, it's important to think up a good reason as to why the world is already so mingled in your story. That backstory will actually add depth to your story rather than pull people out of it, because unlike in something like The Rings of Power, where they just make the world that way just because, there's a reason for it and a story behind it. Think about the different societies and cultures in your world and how they would affect the way that different nations interact with each other. If a culture becomes too muddled, then your readers can start to miss out on all the amazing differences that these races can bring to the table, and how some might work well together but not so well with others. Other things to consider would be racial attributes. For example, in a fantasy setting, different races might boast different magical abilities, or maybe one race is more considered the warrior class. Or on the opposite end, in a science fiction story, different races might have different levels of technological advancements. Some may be having cybernetic augmentations, while others are insulted by the idea of muddling the body with machines. It's also important to consider how different races might be treated by society. Are they discriminated against? Are they in positions of power? And how does this affect the characters in your world? Does race play a significant role in your story, or is it more of an undertone? Well-written races will add depth and complexity to your world, while at the same time adding opportunities for conflict and character development. And that's going to be it for this episode of Creating a Universe. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below, and I'll be answering as many as I can at the end of the series. And remember, there is such thing as stupid questions, doesn't mean that they should not be answered. If you found this helpful, give the video a like and consider subscribing. As always, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to give me a watch, and I'll see you next time.